Hey everybody. So I have kind of been thinking about making this video for a while now, um, and yeah, just everything else has been just being so chaotic. Just never had a chance. So you know what? What's better day to make this video than on Friday, right? Because we got nothing to do. Anyways, um, So this video is gonna be about. I'm trying not to make it very long, and hopefully I can go through the points that I put together very quickly. But this video is gonna be about speeding up things. So we all have one of those sites, that's extremely slow, and it's just slow, and nothing want to touch. Nobody wants to touch the site, and it just stays slow. When someone asks you, can we do X, Y, Z on that page because that particular page is too slow, we just end up doing nothing. Sometimes we can, but we just don't want to dig into the code base. And this happens because we kind of just started on the wrong foot. We started with the wrong mentality, wrong architecture, right? And then we kind of just keep building on that, keep building on that, keep building on that. And it becomes such a big mess at some point, nobody wants to touch, and there's no way to speed up the site. And then a lot of suggestions are rebuild the site, which kind of works, but you gotta be careful with that. But anyways, if your site is really slow, one of the things you can do straight away, I think, is use CDN, right? Um, I think it's called content distribution service or something like that. You can use CDN like Cloudflare. What Cloudflare will do, it's gonna just cache some of the responses. So it's gonna cache some of the data that's returned from the server from the original IP address. It's gonna cache that, keep it there, and when same piece of information is requested again, it'll return the same piece of information without trying to hit the server for the data or for the same page. That's what Cloudflare does. So you can start using Cloudflare straight away. That's point number one. Number two is still related to Cloudflare, but there is no Cloudflare here. It's caching. When you're building a site, you gotta keep caching in mind. What you can do is just cache the stuff, just cache the responses that your server returns. So the way caching works, it takes the data, it takes the entire page, for example, it stores it somewhere in the server. So server has a way to know whether I'm requesting the same page again. If I'm requesting the same page again, server is not going to run all the function it needs to. It's not going to run the database query. It's not going to run none of that. It's going to just ask, is it the same page that I returned before? And it'll just return the same page. And so this speeds things up. So what you can do is, this is what's called caching. You can cache the files. And most frameworks, most languages that you use kind of offer this functionality out of the box. If they don't offer, obviously you can create your own caching functionality, which I wouldn't recommend, but you can, and that will speed up your site again. The third thing that I have in my list is the database queries. You have to be really, really careful when you create database queries. So what I mean by that is, for example, don't put SQL queries inside a loop. So if a loop has to run, for example, 60,000 times, I don't think you want to run the SQL query 60,000 times, depending on what you're doing. Obviously, it's all context dependent. And so whatever I said, take it with a pinch of salt. But you don't want to run 6,000 queries in that loop. It'll just kind of kill your server straight away. I think it'll 100% halt the MySQL server, So anything else that's happening on the page, a user that's trying to log in, a user that's trying to delete something, that'll all slow down. Might even time out. I don't know, because the server is just so slow. So be careful what you put inside a loop. So it's a bit technical, but be careful what you put inside a loop. The next thing is still related to SQL query. You kind of maybe put the data together before you push it to the server. What I mean is that write your query in a way where it can grab all the data and run once, and it can insert everything. So what you would need to do is to arrange your data in a way that you can pass the whole array or structure to the insert query, and so it runs one query. You can run multiple queries, but every single SQL query will, for example, insert 1,000 records. You want to do something like that instead of inserting one record each time you run a loop. Maybe you can run 1,000 records each time you run a loop, you know. That's better, more efficient. You're making less connections to SQL. Another thing, still related to SQL, is connection pool. What you can do in PHP, you can increase the amount of connections that are pooled. That means the amount of connections that are stored in the server ready to be used by PHP. So when PHP runs insert or something like that, update, insert, and retrieve data, it uses this one of the connections. But if every connection that's available, for example, let's say there is 10 connections available, connection pool, and all of them are being used, it won't create 11th connection, right? So you can change the server configs in SQL. You can increase the amount of connection it can have. So for example, you can increase it to 20, so there can be 20 connections simultaneously. That's another point to consider. You guys might notice I'm looking to this side, just going through my notes. There's quite a lot I have here. Well, let's go through this list pretty quickly. I think I mentioned database caching. So just like file caching, database can also cache the results. So for example, if you have a report, right? You have a report, you have a dashboard that shows a lot of information. It shows a sales record, taxes, and then you click on a button, then it shows another report and things like that. It's a there's a heavy queries going on behind the scene. Each time someone refreshes the page, it generates the report again. So, but it has to rerun the SQL queries and to generate the report. What it does, it slows down the server again. You know, let's say you and I go to the page and we both press refresh two times, 3 times, 4 times, 6 times, 10 times. I don't know, you know, because we think something is wrong, or we just want to refresh it randomly every 2 minutes. Your code is gonna run the queries and generate the data, retrieve the data from SQL, manipulate it and all, and return to the user. And it'll keep doing it each time. What if you could just cache that data, you know, that response? Something like, if this is the query, yeah, check if the result is stored somewhere temporarily, you know. If I have returned this information before, if I have, don't send the query to the database again, just return the data. How easy would this make things, you know, that things would be way quicker, because it's not actually generating the report this time, it's just retrieving the report that was generated before. But obviously there is something called hit and miss. If it hits the cache, it'll return the cache. If it misses, then it has to generate the query. But a lot of times what can happen is it can miss, you know, because user is passing different parameters each time they want some information. Maybe they want more records on the page, you know, and this query hasn't run before, so it has to get the data from the database. It hasn't been cached before, obviously, you know, and they change something else in the drop down. They want the data again. This time it has to run the query again. It's gonna miss the cache. So that's hit and miss caching the database queries. I've been kind of told that I speak too fast, and that's because I want to kind of wrap up these videos quickly, because different platforms have different limits. And yeah, let's see, what do I have next? I think I already mentioned, don't have SQL queries inside a loop. Just don't have, you know, this is very amateur mistake. Limit what you run inside a loop, okay? Now, there is n+1 problem, like so common, a lot of people miss it. Let's say, you know, for example, you do have a query inside a loop, you know, and the loop has to run 50 times. So you run 50 SQL queries, yeah? That is fine. 50 SQL queries. It's not actually gonna do nothing, you know, it absolutely won't do nothing if you run 50 SQL queries. Fine, but each query that runs is invoking something else. Let's say there is a function called getData, yeah, and it runs 50 times. Totally fine, you know, 50 times is no problem. But within that same function, there is another SQL query, you know. Within that SQL function, there is 10 other SQL queries, for example, you know. That's where the term comes from, n+1. So you run one query, that one query runs 10 other queries, right? That's n+1. For each query, you run many other queries. And sometimes they can be hidden behind the scene. Sometimes you just trying to get simple piece of information, but behind the scene it's running 10 other things. um, the reason it's running 10 other things is because the data is connected. You can get the first piece of information, which is fine, then loop over it, but you still need other piece of information that sits elsewhere. The solution to this is to get all the data together in first go. you know the first query that you run, get all the data. So you have data in the memory. Now you can loop and do whatever you want to do. This is n+1 problem, very common, kind of easy to avoid. I think this problem often happens people because people just don't pay too much attention. And yeah, that's n+1 problem. For each query, you running many other queries. So for each query, you might be running 50 other queries behind the scene. You don't just know noticing because the data is sitting elsewhere, and you have to get the data anyway to present the complete data to the user, right? Another one is pagination. Like, needless to say, just have pagination for the pages, but also for the APIs, right? A lot of the times people build APIs, but then kind of leave the pagination to the end, and they forget to add pagination. So if someone tries to load the data, there is no limitation. It returns all the data, and it kind of just burns the whole server. Then we go in and then realize, oh, we forgot to add the pagination. But add pagination to the pages, as well as to API responses, obviously. So you can have something like question mark page equals 2 page equals 3. And obviously within each page you also want to limit the data. You don't want to return 500 pieces of information in each page. That'll slow it down again. What do I have? So next thing is actually, which I use a lot. I kind of been unfortunate to use a lot of queues. We have queues. So what queue does is, like, let's say you press a button on a page, yeah. Let's say you select a file, yeah, and you want the system to extract the file and then store it into the database. So you upload the file, then you press the button extract. What it does, you click the button, the request goes to the backend, and on the front end instantly page reloads and you see a message, your file is being processed. Isn't that cool? Compare this to you upload the file, you press the button extract. Now the what do you call that thing that goes round? Oh my god. Anyways, whatever it's called, process bar or something. Keeps going round and round and round and round, and you're still on the page after 30 minutes, and then eventually it times out. Something happens. What if there was a way to kind of just just get rid of that blockage initially? You press the button, refreshes the page, it tells you it's being processed in the background. There is a way you can use queues. This won't really speed up the system, but it'll be more efficient for the user to use queues. So you can push the process function into the queue. The queue will do it. The queue will process it in the end. Slowly it'll keep processing. But for the user's perspective, the page has been refreshed. You told the user you're processing it. That is very efficient. You're not keeping the user on the page all the time. And yeah, queues can be used for many things, but yeah, a lot of the times, if you don't kind of keep the user on the same page, or you kind of don't want to block them from doing other things, you can push the stuff into the queue. It'll be processed eventually. Meanwhile, the user can do other things. CDN, I already mentioned. Use CDN, especially for like small WordPress sites and things like that. I don't think there is much that can go wrong. A lot of times you have to be careful with CDN when you push new changes and all that, and they cache too hard, and then user still sees the old information and things like that. Another thing is quite interesting, which I came across late. I didn't come across recently. I knew about this, but I kind of put it into my notes. Is be careful how much data you store in memory in variables. Let's say you're trying to build a string. Let's say there is a CSV file and you have to go through line by line, and you want to create a long string of information. Then you want to store that string into a variable. That's simple. There's nothing crazy about that. Go through the CSV file and grab a piece of information and then store it into a string. What you want to do with that is up to you, but you just store it into a string as an example. as you concatenate that string, as you put more and more and more and more data into that variable, your system is gonna use more and more memory. So keep that in mind. How much stuff you store in a variable is also important. A lot of times we should probably just use temporary files or something like that. But if you keep you storing big piece of information, big piece, I'm not just talking about small things, big piece of information into a variable, and you keep storing, eventually it will slow down the system if you're working with a big system. A lot of stuff. I think I've been through a lot of stuff here. Caching, I've mentioned. Obviously there is many ways to cache certain things. A lot of times caching as simple as aggregating the data into the database, as soon as it's stored. So when you retrieve the data next time, you just retrieve that particular piece of information instead of going into the database again and calculating the stuff. What you can do, you can just kind of store the last result, the last sum or last calculation into another row in the database, and then just retrieve it the next time. Aggregating the data, that's what it's called. Yeah, I think that's it. That's all I have, except for one last thing is if you, well, not many people do this, but if you're working with large files, avoid re-downloading the files a lot. If you can, reuse the file that you have already downloaded. Don't be too fast in deleting that file, because then you can, if you don't delete the file instantly, you can use it elsewhere to process something else. Maybe you need that same file after 10 minutes or something like that. But a lot of people end up deleting the file because big files take a lot of volume space, and it can fill up very quickly. So think, just keep the files there temporarily, so you don't have to re-download the files. And yeah, try to use streams as well if you can. With streams, you're actually not downloading the file, you're kind of streaming the file bit by bit. But thing with the stream is that if you process the file once and you consume that stream, you cannot just go back with a lot of the libraries. I think with Amazon you can't. If you're downloading a file from S3 and you process the whole file using a stream, you can't just go back to zero and reprocess that file elsewhere in the system if you need to. But yeah, that's all I have, guys. And yeah, it's Friday, I gotta go, but I hope this video has been helpful. Really, quite a few things, and I'm sure there is many other things that I don't have in this list, but these are quite basic things. And if you guys use anything in particular to speed up your site, or APIs, or queries. Oh, talking about queries, obviously you gotta keep in mind you have to index the data where you can. But remember, indexing the data has cost as well, and when the indexing runs, when it builds the indexing, it puts some pressure on the database. But yeah, index your data. But I hope it's been helpful, man. It's Friday. The video is already 18 minutes long, and I don't even think I'll be able to upload this on LinkedIn. Maybe in 2 parts. I don't know, really. But yeah, that's all I have to say about speeding things up. Yeah, that's all. Oh, another thing, actually. Another thing. So I was working on a system recently, built by someone else. So the system would download the big files from S3 bucket using Boto 3 library. So it would download the file, and if there was an interruption, if you couldn't download the file for some reason, the internet went down, timeout, corrupted file, or anything like that, it would re-download. It would re-download the file, which is fine, but there was many other features on that system where it would just, what was that? Just forgetting now. So if there was an interruption, the system would start from zero again. If the system had to do 1, 2, 3, 4 things in row, one after another, and there was an interruption at point 3, the system would start from zero again, and this really slowed down the system. It was not built in mind that, like, we should be able to invoke these individual pieces of functions independently. So it was built like, this runs and then this runs. The order was fine, it runs in that order, that's correct, but it just couldn't run. If it stopped at 2, you couldn't start it from 2 again. You had to start from 1 again. So keep that in mind. Build your system with this in mind, that you can kind of invoke things independently. This would speed the site as well. Anyways, guys, I gotta go. 20 minutes in. I hope this has been helpful. Yeah, if you guys need anything, let me know. Technical, non-technical. Yeah. All right, guys. Catch you later. Bye.